Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the comprehensive yet informal study of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. I'm here with Patrick again, as seems to be the usual setup. Um, since some people are out. Actually, Harrison was with us last time. He's not today, but hopefully he can join us soon in the future. Um, and today we are continuing this transcendental deduction of the categories of the understanding, which Kant argues is necessary for philosophy in order to avoid kind of confusions about how reason functions, and is necessary also because the categories aren't something we can kind of like ground in anything. They're their own kind of thing that we just kind of need to investigate on their own. It's not like in the aesthetic. He specifically a little bit ago compared it to the transcendental aesthetic, which we could kind of ground in experience and kind of like go from there. But for this, there's really nothing. This is kind of the ultimate foundation of transcendental philosophy. And kind of therefore the grounding of experience. So we can't really find a ground for the grounding of experience and then go off of this is where things begin, this is as far back as we can go, so we need to investigate it for itself. And so where that's kind of the general uh, uh, elevator speech of kind of what the deduction is, and specifically where we were in the deduction based off of last session, based on last session, whatever the proper phrasing of that is. We were going over kind of we need a general unity of the manifold of intuitions for anything to be possible at all, including the general category of unity we apply to experience. For that to even be possible, there needs to be an experience, which for that to be possible, there needs to be what he calls the synthetic unity of the manifold. Um, and that's kind of where that's the difference we were highlighting last time. And so we need to seek the unity to understand how this foundational thing, they're just the foundation, right? The transcendental foundation. We need to understand that, and that is made up of a synthetic unity. And so that's what we're going to be exploring today in session 16. So we kind of got there, right? The last session was getting there, understanding that we need that. So now that we understand that we need it, let's get it today in session 16 on the original synthetic unity of apperception. That's kind of the foundation for everything in transcendental philosophy, or at least as it pertains to the transcendental deduction of the categories. So that's kind of my long-winded introduction. Maybe that could have been cut down, but I wanted to get as much context as possible just to in case you were like confused or something or didn't remember. That's where we're at. So
Maybe I can
yeah,
TLDR that a little bit and
yes,
preface it. So, first of all, to preface, we've talked a lot about perception, right? And this is the first time Kant's really going to talk about it in depth. But
yeah,
we've skipped ahead and talked
we've
about it
referenced it.
literally all the time.
Yeah,
The reason we do is because he references it in passing and then, like, doesn't explain it at all. And so
mm,
it's going to be very confusing to anyone who's like, what the hell are you talking about?
yeah. That's one of
Right?
the reasons why this book is hard to read in general,
Because you need to know Kant to read Kant.
which is kind of dumb. So to know Kant, you
It's
have to have like a professor or someone, which is the case for us. We've had people like explain it to us and be like, "Oh, okay." Uh,
yeah, and then I read it, and now the second time around, I can understand most of what he's saying most of the time.
yeah.
With
Which
the
God knows,
assistant,
however, this got off the ground. Actually, this has historical corroboration as well. Or I don't know if corroboration is the right word, but this has historical like precedence at least. There's this tradition of needing Kant to read Kant because according to some I forget what the source I was reading, so maybe this isn't super reliable, but assuming it is, it's the story goes the way this book got popular, it was super unpopular when it got published, right? Because it was super confusing for the reason that Patrick just stated. You kind of need to know Kant to read Kant. So what did people start doing? There was this one theologian who was like, "Oh, I found God and stuff at the back, so I found that interesting. So I read this book from back to front,
yep,
and then it made sense to me. And then I'm like, oh, this is what I should have done from the start." So even he, so even to and then he popularized the critique of pure reason. This theologian whose name escapes me at the moment. I'm sure I could look it up and find it, but and you could look up that story, and I'm sure you'd be able to find it too. So the way this book even got popular is because someone took that initial reading Kant before Kant, and he read the end of Kant, which Kant wanted you to have Kant before that ending of Kant, but
But you
he,
can't.
yeah, so he read the back to the front, and so he had Kant before he had the beginning of Kant. So to understand the beginning of Kant, like we're doing in this study sequentially, chronologically, you need to have the end. So we have the end, kind of, at least enough of the end to explain apperception for you.
All right, but
Um,
regardless of that, I'm gonna try to give the actual TLDR right now, which
okay.
is the fact that like, okay, we're having an experience. All of this is about the grounds of experience.
Yes, that's
Well,
transcendental
the
philosophy.
first ground for us to put all the experience together, what he calls synthetic unity, right? To
Mm-hmm.
know, right, that like this is one experience, is basically, well, what he calls original apperception, right?
Mm-hmm.
I.e., this is happening to me, right? What he highlights as the I thing. And it's not quite a Cartesian I think, therefore I am, but because it doesn't imply substance, but rather just this idea that, like, oh, red. Hey, red is I'm the one experiencing the red, right? Not the substance me so much as the experiencer in a more immediate sense.
Yeah, we're kind of taking the beginning of the cogito without the end, essentially.
Right.
Um,
Basically,
which
yeah,
which
that summarizes it pretty well.
yeah.
It's not I
Cool.
think, therefore I am, but I think, or rather, not even think, simply that I experience. But he uses the term I think.
Yeah, which I think maybe to just kind of get grab the attention of the general philosophical audience because that's the background they're familiar with.
Perhaps.
And then
Anyway,
I think that you're using thinking more in that sense than maybe that we might use in this sense. But
sure.
regardless, that's what he means, and so we're gonna get into that in detail now. Great. Do you want to start us off
Yeah,
with
sure.
reading? Cool.
The I think must be able to accompany all my representations, for otherwise something would be represented in me that could not be thought at all, which is as much as to say that the representation would either be impossible or else at least would be nothing for me. That representation that can be given prior to all thinking is intuition. Thus, all manifold of intuition has a necessary relation to the I think in the same subject which this manifold is to, in which this manifold is to be in.
I think Fichte, if we want to get in the broader uh, history of philosophy, which maybe isn't a good thing to do, like write the section, but I just figured I'd say it while I was thinking it. That this, I think Fichte tries to get lots of mileage out of this, like little intuition is connected to the I think. I think he's trying to. That's where he kind of derives the fundamental uh, uh, nature of the I in his philosophy. That maybe is not
So
correct, but yeah, and I think this maybe is where he like picks that up on. I don't know. That's just a speculative thought for me, but I don't know if you agree or disagree. I think that's relevant, but
yeah, more or less, but the um for Kant, if you notice, the self-positing is not the first. It's the first act, but it's not the first thing in experience, right?
well, I
Basically, if you
guess it
think of
depends on the
experience in
relationship.
order, well, if you think you can actually think of experience kind
No, it
of
is
in
an
a
act. He just said, well, we didn't get there yet, so maybe that's
no,
why I
it's the
didn't.
first act. I did say it's an act. I didn't say it's the first.
Oh, oh,
Let me
yeah.
clarify what I'm
Sorry.
saying first.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, there's sort of an order of experience in Kant, right?
Mm-hmm.
First, you have the pure form of intuition in time and space,
Uh huh.
right? Imagine pure time and space. I can't, but for some reason, Kant can.
Mm-hmm.
um, anyway, then you imagine something in the time and space, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain redness, and then a certain blueness, and the combination of red and blue creates, let's say, a circle, a red circle and a blue background. Now, we haven't actually been able to think that yet. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what you should be imagining, but you should not yet recognize that it is a circle. Imagine you don't know what to call it. You don't know what you're seeing. You're a baby.
Yeah, you're like beholding this shit for the first time. You're like, what the fuck?
You're just like, colors, but you don't even have the word color, so you're just going, "Wah."
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the first thing you actively do here is basically posit your own self-awareness. You're like, there's red and blue. You are aware. You're basically self-aware in a very
Well,
primitive
before you even
sense.
go, there's red, there's blue, right? Because we're saying we don't have those.
Right. But before you can
We go,
even do
there is. We go, whoa, there is. There is.
yeah, well, it's simply, I think, or rather,
There
appears
is
to
for
me,
me. Yeah.
appears, yes, there is for me, is probably the best
Babies
translation
be
in the
like,
world
there is for me. There's so many good
of
memes
something
that
that
come
is
out of this
constant.
shit.
Babies be
Be
like,
like, there is for me.
yeah, basically, yes. There
Actually,
is for
that
me.
is very Freudian. Freud, I believe, his theory of the origin of subjectivity has to do with the fact that like is based out of like need and desire, like that there are objects and they exist for me. So this goes along
Hold,
with
hold
that.
up.
Uh,
Hold up. Confused manifold exists. Pure consciousness is for me.
yeah, yeah. Oh god, that's good. And yes, I think that actually does like is fully like we're not even like compromising any like content like for the sake of the funny meme. Like that literally just is how it works. Um,
So yes, that's what's going on right now. And
mm,
before we can get to red, blue, circle, the terms we've actually applied to this, before consciousness can even think that, it has to think is for me?
yes, yes. Shit is for me, and then that shit gets conceptualized. But
Yes.
um, there's a general manifold of shit. So
Gotcha.
to put it
So
crudely, cool. So that's where we're at with that, and that's where Um,
right.
that Ficta actually. So I guess this isn't really Ficta. That's more just like,
Well,
well,
yeah, according to Ficta, the is for me comes before there's a thing for the is for me to come
yeah, which is
with.
where he kind of gets fucked up. So
So instead of nobody pure or nobody manifold of intuition, nobody nothing.
yeah,
Ficta is for me.
yeah, which is yeah. So practical comes before the theoretical, and that gets all fucking weird. Which, and I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think I do, but that's how Ficta works, folks. If you're interested, and so I guess there is a relation, necessary relation, but it's not the same one as Ficta. So I'm actually glad we went over that because that helped flesh out what the Kant one is, which is that like meme we were just talking about. So cool. All
Good.
right, I'm glad we understand that fully now.
Uh,
All right.
but this representation is an act of spontaneity, i.e., it cannot be regarded as belonging to the sensibility. I call it pure apperception, in order to distinguish it from the empirical one, or also the original apperception, since it is that self consciousness which, because it produces the representation I think, which must be able to accompany all others, and which is in all consciousness, is one and the same, cannot be accompanied. Can't read that.
By any further representation,
By any further
I can
representation.
try to zoom in a little. Does that help?
Oh, that's much better.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay. I also call its unity the transcendental unity of self consciousness, in order to designate the possibility of a priori cognition from it. For the manifold of representations that are given in a certain intuition would not altogether be my representations if they did not altogether belong to a self consciousness, i.e., as my representations, even if I am not conscious of them as such. Yet they must yet necessarily be in accord with the condition under which alone they can stand together in universal self consciousness, because otherwise they would not throughout belong to me. From this original combination, much may be inferred. Yeah,
Uh,
like we've been saying, we've
I was gonna say a lot of
talked
that is
around this over and over and over again, but this is one of the simplest concepts in Kant. It's simply that in order for me to like basically think about anything in my representation, I have to be aware that I am having an experience, that there is a me to have an experience. Not in the sense of like I know what I am, I'm a soul, I am blah 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 blah, but simply that like there is a common
Whatever
element.
I am, I am.
Yeah,
like there
there
is
is this
something there.
right, there is this common element between all the manifold, which is that they are being perceived. Who is the perceiver? I don't know, but like it's doing the perceiving.
Yeah.
So I hope that's pretty clear. We've been over it a bunch of times.
Yeah. Let us know if you need more help. Then we'll harp on it more and probably be able to tailor it to like how you need it explained. But that in a general way, like without pandering to certain people, that is the most basic, reduced, watered down way we can explain it while still maintaining all of like the content.
Yeah.
So
The
so
only thing that could be confusing is like what's the difference between me as substance and me as like subject, which that's the best way I can describe it is one is you know what you are, right? I know what I am.
mm,
Me such that I know what I am, or me such merely that I know that I am having an experience.
mhm. Which is
The latter is apperception.
and the former is like Descartes. So
Yeah, the former is sort of Descartes. I mean,
uh,
Descartes. I
I
think
guess it's not
Descartes.
exclusively Descartes, but Descartes
I feel
like
like
that has a
Kant
take
might
on that.
say that that's Descartes, but really what it is he's sort of muddles the two together. He says basically
In
that this
terms of
apperception.
like how he talks about it, yeah,
Well,
like the
yeah,
language he
when he
uses.
talks about like the I think, that is original apperception, but that he can say I am a thinking substance is not an acceptable leap according to Kant,
Yes,
because in the former he's really talking about apperception, but in the latter he's talking
yeah.
about what you are in yourself.
Which I guess coming from a more like, well, not me personally, but like maybe for anyone coming from a more like general philosophy background, that is like super interesting because at least how it's taught to me, the cogito is like, oh, what could be more clear than the cogito, right? And even Descartes is like, oh yes, this is the foundational like knowledge upon which I will build my philosophy. Kant saying no, you can get even more foundational. He's challenging the cogito basically.
Well, I mean,
That's a way of interpreting this, I guess you
I
could.
wouldn't interpret it as challenging the cogito. It's the ergo sum he's challenging with.
Well, yeah, it's just, so sorry, but by the cogito, I'm that's a shortening for me of the cogito ergo
Right,
sum.
cogito ergo sum.
He's
I
challenging
think
that
I am.
as foundational.
But according to Kant, sum does not mean being in like the
A
most broad
substantial way.
possible
Yeah.
sense. Right. So if we take being in the most broad possible sense, namely simply presence in whatever form, then yeah, sure, cogito ergo sum. But you can't assert from that that I am a thinking substance. Substance is a particular kind of thinghood, namely that which endures throughout time and change.
Yeah.
And that is what you can't actually assert.
Which is what Descartes explicitly was like. That's what he was like. That was he's arguing. So.
Right, he's arguing basically that oh, there's this substance, this unchanging thing that does the thinking. And Kant says, no, you just know that there's some
Yeah, you
sort
can't
of
make that like a sub.
happening thing.
Yeah, it's more vague and honestly quite possibly could change. We don't really know yet, at least. So let's not make assumptions about what that is. Let's just say that it is. Let's just say I think. Let's just start there.
Yeah,
Is what he's saying.
basically, yes. And if you're going to say I am, if you're going to say ergo sum, it has to be in the most broad sense possible.
Yes. All right.
So, yeah.
Great.
And that's definitely justified when you.
However, he does say right at the end here of this paragraph that much may be inferred, which probably isn't going to be Descartes' inferences. So he has some new inferences. He has cogito, ergo, and then different shit than sum. So let's figure out what that is. I guess is where we should go from here.
I
Um,
can't.
what's that?
I said I can't. That's all I said.
Oh, okay, your mic went out. So not completely. I can hear you now. Okay, cool. So, namely, this thoroughgoing identity. Oh, thoroughgoing. Hmm. Maybe this isn't Cartesian, right? thoroughgoing.
Thoroughgoing identity of the apperception of the manifold. Let him finish the sentence before we
Oh,
elaborate.
yeah. Sorry, I'm jumping. Okay. Namely, this thoroughgoing identity of the apperception of a manifold given in intuition contains a synthesis of the representations and is possible only through the consciousness of this synthesis. For the empirical consciousness that accompanies different representations is by itself dispersed and without relation to the identity of the subject. The latter relation, therefore, does not yet come about by my accompanying of each. God, I can't read tonight. Does not yet come about by my accompanying each representation with consciousness, but rather by adding one representation to the other and being conscious of their synthesis. Therefore, it is only because I can combine a manifold of given representations in one consciousness that it is possible for me to represent the identity of the consciousness in these representations itself, i.e., the analytical unity of apperception is only possible under the presupposition of some synthetic one, which is a big claim, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I'm sure, but let me just finish this. The thought that these representations given in intuition altogether belong to me means, accordingly, the same as that I unite them in self-consciousness, or at least can unite them therein, and although it is itself not yet the consciousness of the synthesis of representations, it still presupposes the possibility of the latter. That is, only because I can comprehend their manifold in a consciousness do I call them altogether my representations. For otherwise, I would have as multicolored, diverse a self as I have representations of which I am conscious. Synthetic unity of the manifold of intuitions, as given a priori, is thus the ground of the identity of apperception itself, which precedes a priori all my determinate thinking. Combination does not lie in the objects, however, and cannot, as it were, be borrowed from them through perception, and by that means first taken up into the understanding, but is rather only an operation of the understanding, which is itself nothing further than the faculty of combining a priori and bringing the manifold of given representations under unity of apperception, which principle is the supreme one in the whole of human cognition. So I think basically what Kant is doing is positing an unconsciousness that does the combining.
Yeah, well, I don't know that he makes the conscious or unconscious distinction.
Well, I think
but
he does. I think that's the difference between analytical and synthetic in this specific case.
well, he's saying that synthetic is unconscious. I mean, yes, I would agree with you that what he's describing is an unconscious process. I
Yes, that's
just
what I
don't
mean.
think that he makes a hard distinction between conscious and unconscious processes.
Well, I think no, yeah, I think that's
Because I could do
exactly
that
what he's doing.
consciously or unconsciously. Where does he make a synthetic? Where does he say that one is conscious and the other is unconscious?
Um,
I think, yes, it's clear
somewhere,
to me that original synthesis is an unconscious process. But I just don't think that he makes that distinction, per
or
se.
at least can unite them therein, and although it is not yet the consciousness of the synthesis of representations, it still presupposes the possibility of conscious synthesis.
Well, hold on. So he unites it together. It's not the consciousness of the synthesis of representations, but rather the synthesis of the representations. So it's not self-conscious synthesis, yes.
Exactly, it's unconscious synthesis.
I
That's
don't
exactly
think
what I'm
that
saying.
Okay, but I'm not sure that the lack of self-conscious awareness of what you are doing is the same as an unconscious process. For example,
Yeah, an
right?
example might
We
help.
go around, yeah, we go around talking about how like, oh, a priori, a posteriori synthetic, lol, a
Mm,
priori synthetic, right?
mm,
Okay, a 5-year-old doing math does not understand that they are making a priori synthetic judgments.
mm-hmm.
So Kant is merely saying, right, we don't have to know that such a synthesis is like that we are synthetically uniting these things. In the same way that a 5-year-old doesn't have to know that they are synthetically uniting a priori like intuitions when they do math.
Right. It's a completely
But
unconscious
that's
process.
not. But I wouldn't say that 5-year-olds doing math are doing an unconscious process. They simply are not conscious of like an element of what they are doing. Like,
No, but that's fundamentally what they are doing.
so would you say that a 5-year-old counting is unconscious of what they are doing?
Fundamentally, they're unconscious of the fundamental like metaphysical like
Okay, so
shit
you're
going
just
on. Yeah,
using unconscious in a different way than I was imagining originally. Because
probably. Yeah.
what I was thinking of is like a process that you are not aware of wholly. Like, as in, I am not even like, it doesn't occur to me that I am walking sometimes. You might lose sight of the fact that you are even walking, right? If you get really lost in thought. You're
Yeah,
like,
but I mean, it's similar, but not the same to that because this is something that we are not. Prior to Kant, we weren't even fucking aware. We were like, it's not like walking. You're conscious of it. You forget it. You're conscious again. We didn't even know this happened. Kant's the first one to be like, oh shit, this is happening, which is why he's so
no,
huge in philosophy.
that's not true.
Okay,
It's
well,
present in Leibniz.
okay, then Leibniz. But my point is like,
Well, it's just that, but that's not what the conscious unconscious distinction is, as far as I'm like
well, that's how
aware.
I was using it. Sorry, that's the maybe so
Right?
maybe
Because
different wording.
so like if you look at Freud, what Freud is saying
Mm.
is like the whole process is unconscious, not that I'm not aware of the particular details of what I'm doing, right? So
Uh,
it's the
yeah,
difference between someone who is sleepwalking
yes,
versus someone who is walking who does not understand the anatomy of what walking is,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, I was using
So
it in the
I thought you were
sleepwalking
talking.
way.
Oh, no, I thought you were talking about it in the. Kant's talking about it in the anatomy way.
Mm,
Kant is saying, I think here, right? I unite them in self-consciousness, or at least unite them in, though it is not yet conscious, the consciousness of the synthesis of the representations.
it still
So you don't have
presupposes
to
the
be conscious.
possibility. In other words, it's necessary for it
Well,
to.
so for example, right, our baby here, right,
Mm,
is not conscious that by putting the red and the blue together, they have performed synthesis. But that
yeah,
doesn't mean that they aren't like conscious of doing it. They just don't know what they're doing as they're doing it.
exactly. And what it is they are doing, that part that they're not aware of, is the foundation. It presupposes the ability, the possibility of the latter. It
Okay, I
presupp.
think I think it's basically about the what you were doing versus that you were doing. They are conscious that they are doing. They are not conscious of what they are doing.
Exactly. But what
Okay.
I'm pointing
So,
out,
so,
what I find
so
interesting.
what I'm saying in Freud
Mm,
is the unconsciousness of that you are doing. That is newer in Freud.
oh, yes. Well,
Although, of course, this also kind of exists in Leibniz. I mean, it exists in Plato.
sure. Okay,
So,
I'm not
so
saying okay. Maybe so. I don't. I'm not as familiar with the history of philosophy as you are. So maybe I was wrong in saying it's the first. But regardless, I think this is just a fascinating, important like
yeah,
breakthrough in thought. And for the first time, we are aware of this unconscious process. That's all I was trying to say. That's all I originally intended to say. Although I think this is also
I don't
like
know.
useful and
I
interesting too.
think, yeah, I think regardless, I think it's probably time to move on with
Yeah.
uh, what observations we have from this.
Well, that was the first one for me. That was that.
Yeah.
I think that's
No,
interesting and
no, no.
important.
That's what I mean. I mean, see, the linguistic ambiguity again. What I mean is, we have our observations. Let's move forward.
Oh, okay. Did you have any other ones about this or no?
Not in particular.
Okay, cool. Then yeah, then let's move on. I believe it's your turn to read.
Oh, so it is.
Oh, actually, wait. Before we do that, there's a footnote. Sorry. Uh, Scanning this over. Do you think this is worth?
Hold on. Sure, actually.
Yeah. Do you wanna read this footnote?
Sure. The analytical unity of consciousness pertains to all common concepts as such. If I think of red in general, I thereby represent to myself a feature that, as a mark, can be encountered in anything, or that can be combined with other representations. Therefore, only by means of an antecedently conceived possible synthetic unity that I can represent to myself. What? Therefore, only by means of an antecedently conceived possible synthetic unity, I represent to myself the analytical unity. Actually, this does seem to be kind of him just rephrasing what he said.
Yeah.
A representation that is to be thought of as common to several must be regarded as belonging to those that, in addition to it, have something different in themselves. Consequently, they must antecedently be conceived in a synthetic unity with other, even if only possible, representations, before I can think of the analytical unity of consciousness, in that it makes, in that, in it that makes it into a conceptus communis. And thus, the synthetic unity of apperception is the highest point to which one must affix the use of the understanding.
All use of the understanding.
All use of the understanding, even the whole of logic, and after it, transcendental philosophy. Indeed, this faculty is the
Oh,
understanding
so that's
itself.
kind of interesting. He's making an identity claim here that understanding is the synthetic unity of consciousness or apperception, whatever.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that comes in.
I mean, I just think that's interesting. I'm not sure that the bigger picture.
Well, I want to know, like, how does that, how does that work?
How does synthetic unity work? I don't know what you're saying.
Well, why is it the understanding?
Um,
Like,
because it's spontaneous. He says that earlier up here.
no, but that's why it would be an act of the understanding. But why is it identical to the understanding itself?
And thus because it's the highest point to which one must affix all use of the understanding. I guess he's going after like a functional thing here.
I'm not sure that's the same as an identity statement.
Well, if you're basing identity based on functionality, which is controversial and you might not agree with, but
But that's not the case, even if you are basing identity on functionality, right? So, for instance, if I say
yeah, well, it is
the
all use. It must affix all use. It's the foundational use. Therefore,
yes,
it
saying
is
it's the
that thing.
foundation of all understanding. No, I don't see the connection there.
Well,
I,
that's how functional identity works, is it not? This thing does this thing, therefore it is this thing.
but it doesn't do only that thing. That's just the basis, right? You might say,
Well,
in
it's
order
like the
for
Aristotelian. It's like humans obviously don't perform. Oh, but that's like saying human beings
no,
would be a reason. Okay, no, I see
no, no,
that.
no, 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 no. What I'm saying is, like, he's saying before you can do anything else in the understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of that is predicated on the idea that you have this original apperception.
Yes.
Okay. Well, all of my life is predicated on my birth.
Uh huh.
Is my life
Your birth.
identical to my birth? No.
Well, I guess it depends on how you're defining like life. I guess you could interpret it that way if you wanted to. Like if I don't like, you could just say that life is just an extension of this fundamental phenomena known as birth. Then I guess if you were, and that seems to be what Kant is doing here.
I don't think that makes. That's not what identity is, right? For two things to be identical, you shouldn't be able to distinguish between the two of them. And I can distinguish from, like, the event that is my birth and events that happened prior. Now, of course,
But it depends on how you define. If you define life as just as literally birth and just different things happening as just what may be perceived as different things happening is actually just extensions of birth. Then until
um,
death, then yes, you could say that it's what's happening now is just my birth. I'm still like, you
I
know what I
think I
mean?
see what you're saying, but I don't
It's a
know.
weird thing, but I guess it's not.
That seems like a weird way to use words.
I mean, but this is also Kant, so like, so I guess he's saying it like that, like everything is
Perhaps.
just an extension of like understanding is like fundamentally what's happening, and so like everything is just an extension of, which does also still seem to be kind of Fichtean. But
Yeah.
okay,
Okay. Well,
weird.
regardless.
Let's move on, I guess. Uh, knowing Kant, we probably won't get any like nice closure on that either. So let's just yeah, womp womp. Okay, so I guess since you read the footnote, I'll read this. Um, Now, this principle of the necessary unity of apperception is, to be sure, itself identical, thus an analytical proposition. Yet it declares as necessary a synthesis of the manifold given in an intuition, without which that thoroughgoing identity of self-consciousness could not be thought. For through the I, as simple representation, nothing manifold is given. It can only be given in the intuition, which is distinct from it and thought through combination in a consciousness. Okay, so this is very different from Fichte, and where I like got a lot of mileage where I wrote my paper about how Fichte isn't a true Kantian back in freshman year of Drew. Anyway,
That's a very cold take.
I know. I felt so like cool writing it. I thought I was like some awesome like insightful like student.
No, that's a very, very cold take.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, I know that now. But when I was writing in spring of 22, I was like, holy shit, I'm so cool for noticing this, because but to be fair, given what we wrote in class, it was pretty insightful. Oh, we hadn't read this part, and obviously we were reading the whole critique. I got to this conclusion based on like the transcendental aesthetic. So I guess maybe I was insightful. I don't know. But now that we have all this, this is definitely a cold take. Anyway, an understanding in which through self-consciousness all of the manifold would be at the same time given would intuit. Ours can only think and must seek the intuition in the senses. I am therefore conscious of the identical self in regard to the manifold of the representations that are given to me in an intuition, because I call them altogether my representations, which constitute one. But that is as much as to say that I am conscious a priori of their necessary synthesis, which is called the original synthetic unity of apperception, under which all representations given to me stand, but under which they must also be brought by means of synthesis. So he's basically saying, now that we're conscious of it, it becomes, hang on. Yes, so so it's this so the synthetic unity of apperception, or the necessary unity of apperception as a proposition, like fully thought out, is analytical, right? Is what he's saying here at the beginning. But what it's declaring is a synthesis of the manifold. So I think basically that the nature of this paragraph is what he's doing to like sum up this paragraph, how I would, and you can correct
Well,
me
it's
on.
the difference between transcendental and logical again, right?
Yeah,
So,
sure,
for
yes,
instance,
yes, you could say it that way,
when we
yes.
talk about the infinite mode of judgment, he is, not the double negative, right?
Mm,
He he is undead. No, but the infinite judgment,
mm,
right? Where you negate the negative is logically identical to a positive statement, but it
mm,
is not identical from an experiential standpoint,
mm,
right? So it's transcendentally distinct, right? So he's saying similarly here, um, though the necessary unity of perception is, necessarily logically just
mm,
self-identity, right?
mm,
In order for that self-identity to exist, it has to first be given synthetically.
yes.
So, in other words, it appears transcendentally first as synthetic,
Mm,
and then can be logically judged to be analytical.
mm.
So it's that logical versus transcendental distinction is the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, sure. I am now already forgetting the way I would have explained it, because it's essentially that. I was going to put it in different terminology, but I think I was going to say the same thing, so I guess I'll just spare the extra explanation. Darn. I'm just annoyed that I'm forgetting what I was going to say, so now I'm being stubborn. But content-wise, I don't think it makes much of a difference. Yeah. I don't think there's much else to say about this.
Indeed.
Oh yeah, okay. I kind of remember. Yeah, I was basically. I think what I was gonna say is that this is an analytical proposition, like in logical nature. But to even be able to do that, we first need to synthetically put it together to realize that it's an analytical thing. Like the synthesis precedes the analytical nature in the way that Patrick just explained. So yeah, I was literally just going to give like an explanation of what you said, but worse. So okay, so let's just stick with yours. Not that they're different, but yours is just received better and more clear. So okay, yeah, that's it then for this section. And that's probably just for the sake of keeping this like one by one. I'll probably just end the session here, and we can do section 17 another time, which, looking ahead, is the principle of the synthetic unity of apperception is a supreme principle of use of the understanding, which seems to be what he was saying in this footnote. So maybe, unlike what I just said earlier about us not getting a lot of closure in Kant, maybe we actually will get some extra elaboration on what he meant by, because he seemed to be saying it is the supreme, therefore it is the understanding itself. So maybe he'll make some similar remark and give us some more detail, just so we can be sure of what he was saying and be confident in its whether or not it is an actual like good proposition or not to be making. So yeah, guess we'll see that next time. Any other closing comments, Patrick?
I don't think so.
All right. So this has been the comprehensive yet informal study critique of pure reason, and we are continuing to deduce the transcendental categories, and it seems we're getting closer in that because we're getting to the fundamental unity. And what is that unity? It is the transcendental apperception, which is shit exists for me. And then at the very end, we elaborated that yes, that's analytical once you get to it, but to get to it, you need to synthesize it, and the synthesis necessarily comes first, because you wouldn't have anything to analyze if it weren't first synthetically given. And logically, it is analytical, but you need to have a transcendental grounding for anything you analytically judge, which also has some interesting connections to what we think might be labeled as like the unconscious, and maybe even therefore has some links to Freud. So that's some interesting things for all you scholars to go and like research, I guess, if you want, or just think about casually. Yeah, so that's been this session, and we'll continue next time with now that we have the synthetic unity of apperception, we can understand it as a supreme principle of all the use of the understanding. Or maybe not, maybe Kant's wrong, but we'll see next time. We'll make that judgment. So yeah, thank you, and we'll see you later. Bye.